The Bob Murphy Show, episode 467.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. Another crossover. This time, Adam Heyman and I are fulfilling our pledge. In the last episode, we said we were going to talk about game theory, and that's what we did. It's a pretty deep dive, but I think it's a good blend of geeky technical stuff, but also big picture, like, what does it all mean, man? So I think you're going to enjoy it. Here we go. Adam Heyman and I talking about game theory.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
So I don't know about you, but I am very excited because today we're going to talk about game theory. And to set us up, to inform our discussion, I brought a little picture for you people watching on the YouTube. You can see it right now. And it's a picture of all my favorite games. We got Scrabble there. We got Monopoly. We got chess. I think that's even a hand of poker being displayed. Royal Flush. Very nice. We got Clue. Got like Parcheesi or something. And I love all these games. And we're going to talk game theory. I'll start. My theory in Clue is that it more often than not, it's Miss Scarlet and Colonel Mustard, because I think they're not very trustworthy. So what do you think about game theory?
Do they use the candlestick?
More often than not, no one uses the rope.
Yeah.
Weird.
Well, it's funny, as with most things in formal economics, it's not what you thought it was going to be. I remember when I got to NYU my first year, and we're sitting there, and the model, like the models of how you're going to solve the problem sets. There's one consumer who lives forever. There's one firm that has one production function, and there's no money.
Study the economy.
Yeah, and there's no money in the model, because why would there be? There doesn't need to be. There's one good, so why would there be money? And you solve that and find the equilibrium, the wage rate and interest rate, and there you go. So, and likewise in game theory, right? You are not at all studying. It's not the theory of games as you would imagine. So what it is, folks, it's the theory of strategic interaction. And the reason, if one might say, well, okay, but what's the difference between like that and like standard economics? And I think, there's different approaches people could say, but I think the main element is, again, what do you mean when you talk about strategy, is that in a standard economic model, you're not what am I trying to say? You're not so much worried about like what the other people are thinking. Okay. Like you don't have to get inside the minds of the other agents in those things. It's more just like you're the household, you take the prices as given, your income, and then you say, what combination of goods is going to maximize my utility? If you're the firm, you take the price of the inputs as given as outputs and the technological production function that you have, and you say, what maximizes my profit, right? Whereas in something like The Prisoner's Dilemma, the payoff from yours, or any game, the payoff from your strategy that you pick is partially dependent on the strategies that all the other players pick, at least in principle. And so part of the deal is like each player has to kind of guess at or come up with, procedures to determine what do I think the other players are going to do.
Before we dive too deep, I actually prepped for this episode, Bob. I went to Wikipedia and I read some of it. I was wondering if I could throw the first description of this subject from there by you, because A, I want to know if you think they got it all, and B, I think they might be trying to shove game theory into areas where maybe it doesn't pertain. So what do you think about this from Wikipedia? Game theory is the study of mathematical models of strategic interactions. It has applications in many fields of social science and is used extensively in economics, logic, system science, and computer science. Initially, game theory addressed two-person, zero-sum games in which a participant's gains or losses are exactly balanced by the losses and gains of the other participant. In the 1950s, it was extended to the study of non-zero-sum games and was eventually applied to a wide range of behavioral relations. It is now an umbrella term for the science of rational decision-making in humans, animals, and computers. And I don't know, something about all that just sounded a little too broad.
Well, most of those sentences are definitely true. And then, yeah, the only stuff that could be debatable is, as you say, where they're applying it to stuff. Like, I don't know exactly what they mean by applying it to computer science, but I suppose if the computers are acting as if they're trying to achieve ends, I guess that would make sense. So that's the only one. Everything else, I know what the person who wrote that means. The computer science stuff, I'm not as sure what that means, but I imagine it means something.
Yeah, I didn't make a note, but they said a whole bunch of papers were written about game theory in relation to biological evolution even.
Oh, do you want me to explain that?
Sure.
Yeah, so ironically, that's actually one of the places where I think it makes more sense.
Okay.
And so, and let me just anticipate. So where we're going to go with this, folks, or I have some slides and things and an anecdote that's borderline funny, where my take is going to be, I think the real perversity of how game theory is used by the real mathematically proficient economists, at least the stuff that I've seen and how they use it in economics. The issue is not so much the mathematical formalism, even though you could quibble about that stuff. Like, oh, you're really capturing everything, and life is so complicated. And you try to boil it down to 8 strategies. Come on, that's crazy. Yes, but even stipulating all that for the sake of argument, the equilibrium construct that they use in this assumption that not just assume people are playing this game, but also that we're only going to analyze the equilibrium outcomes. And we're going to see as we get into this, Adam, like how nutty that ends up being sometimes. That the problem is if people are thinking about what's going on, they could realize, well, what's chaining us into, continuing to play along with this equilibrium?
Right.
Why don't we do something else if it makes us all better up, right? But where that is somewhat defensible is if it's just, genes predisposing animals in the wild to do a certain thing, and then an equilibrium just means any random mutation is going to lead to fewer offspring for that thing. And so it's kind of is, once you get in that rut, you're going to stay there. So if you're modeling, like hawks and doves or something, or predator-prey relations, and you can see what the payoffs would be, and after a certain, if there's so many predators going around, then actually on the margin, you might be better off if you go forage for food rather than try to hunt something, or so there's different ways you could model like the quote strategy available to different organisms, and doing it that way, and with the payoff being couched like in reproductive fitness or something. And then they're like to say, a Nash equilibrium just means, if the various populations all got into this particular outcome, like if this group was doing this and this group was doing that, or even a thing like, when Bambi fights the other, buck? Is that what he is? That they, you don't fight to the death. You know what I mean? So there's different strategies and so just things along those lines, and like what would it mean to talk about a Nash equilibrium? And we'll define all this stuff in a minute, folks. But that's what they're getting at, and in some settings that actually does kind of make sense. So again, it's not that the genes are thinking and choosing strategies. It's just when you define what it means. But then the notion of this, once you hit an equilibrium, they would just stay there. In some settings, that actually makes more sense if it is mindless, genes just predisposing behavior.
I get it. Maybe that's the relevance in computer science too. Maybe you want to say a little something about the history of it.
Yeah, sure. So is it in 1944 that it's
There was a
Morgenstern.
history of it before the 50s, but it really kicked off in the 50s. John von Neumann wrote a book called On the Theory of Games of Strategy in 28, and then a really big one, The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior in 40-something.
I think it's 44, and that's
Yeah.
with Morgenstern, right?
Yep, that sounds right.
Okay, so that one, yeah. So von Neumann, who's like just this, there's stuff like things floating around about him on Twitter, like he knew a bunch of languages when he was like 4 or something crazy, and
he was an alien, just like Elon, apparently. Yeah.
The list of accomplishments of that guy in various fields is incredible. And so anyway, amongst his things is he is arguably the founder of modern game theory. So yeah, in 44 he had it with Oscar Morgenstern, who's an Austrian economist, both like ethnically or whatever, nationality wise, but also arguably in the school of thought. And so the thinking is like Morgenstern kind of helped him frame it in terms of like agents thinking strategically, but then von Neumann solved all the math. Right. But anyway, so there, yes, they were narrowly focused on, it was 2-person game, zero-sum games. I think it was just 2-person. And so stuff like poker and whatever, like any kind of game like that is a zero-sum. And so like there's a lot you can do with that. And they had all kinds of stuff like mini-max theorems and things like that that were applicable. But those results only went so far as, and then John Nash comes along, the Russell Crowe movie, A Beautiful Mind, was about him. And so by the way, that movie is awful in terms of trying to give you, it's not just that it's off, it's like the exact opposite, like the bar scene where he's like, Adam Smith was wrong. Adam Smith needs update and we all get laid. Like, no, that was the exact, what he described was not a Nash equilibrium, okay, where they all ignore the hot blonde or something. Anyway, and so what Nash did is his thesis is hilarious. It's got 2 citations. One is, I believe, to Morgenstern and von Neumann, and the other is to a paper that he himself wrote, Nash. Like it's an early, like it's, but it's cool. He just sets up and when you allow for mixing. All right, I'll try to say this succinctly. The problem is in pure strategies, there might not be an equilibrium. So Nash equilibrium, he didn't call it Nash equilibrium, but an equilibrium in general. He was trying to come up with a broader concepts for games beyond just zero-sum ones. And so he just, someone generically open-ended said, yeah, each player is just going to have a certain number of, like a strategy space assigned to them. And then an equilibrium concept is just to say it's a set of strategies of each player such that given what everybody else is doing, each player's strategy in that, profile is a best response. And if that's true for every player and for every strategy in this particular profile, then that profile constitutes an equilibrium, right? And that's not what we call a Nash equilibrium. So that's an interesting thing. But then what the reason, his paper was important and everything is he showed under pretty broad conditions, there always exists an equilibrium, right? So that's how, and when you do new stuff in economics, like to show the existence of something is kind of important. Otherwise people are like, yeah, who cares? So anyway, think of a rock, paper, scissors game. Okay. And so there in pure strategies, there's not a Nash equilibrium, right? You can't, if the first player says, I'm going to do rock and the other guy says scissors, well, that's not an equilibrium because the guy's saying scissors wants to change. Scissors is not a best response to rock, right? So if they're just doing pure strategies, there's no Nash equilibrium. However, if they're allowed to randomize and assign probability weights to each of their pure strategies, then if each person's mixing evenly, that constitutes a Nash equilibrium, right? Given that the other guy is just randomly doing 1/3 of each thing, you're indifferent among your strategies, and so you might as well mix. And if they both do that, they're both okay. So that's what Nash did in his thing, and so that's kind
I was interested as I was doing the tiny bit of research I did, the distinction between cooperative versus non-cooperative games, zero-sum versus non-zero-sum games, and then simultaneous versus sequential games. I hadn't even known they really did it sequentially, which of course is important because poker is a non-cooperative, zero-sum sequential game.
Yeah.
And I thought it was fascinating stuff, and I'm thrilled to get into it with you.
Okay, yeah, let me just, for the people at home, so real quick. So simultaneous versus sequential, just if there's order in the play, right? Like, so rock, paper, scissors is simultaneous, right? Each player picks their thing, and then, they see what the other guy did. Whereas, like obviously poker, because you get to see some other things first before you have to do your second one. It's not worth saying right here. And plus, if I did it without people going through an example, you wouldn't know. But when you pick your strategy, in a sequential game, it's like at the outset you got to just specify. Like, so you would say, given what cards I end up seeing after they're freshly dealt, then under any possible cards I see, this is what I would do in each scenario. And then, given that we went down that path, depending on what I see, like if these two guys fold and this guy stays in and he raises bet, you know what I mean? So it would get really big mathematically in terms of specifying just your strategy, because you'd have to do all the contingencies ahead of time. Like it would have to be fully specified. So a game a real game like 5-card draw poker or something would have a huge strategy space.
As just a minor aside, in the late 90s, I ran across, I'll never be able to remember the title, but it was my favorite book on 7-card stud high that I've ever seen. And I didn't know at the time, but he was
you smoke a joint before you play?
Very high. I didn't realize it at the time, but he'd laid out the decision trees on what to do on every street, the way I just saw in this Wikipedia article about simultaneous decision trees in game theory. And I thought, he's probably messing up the usefulness, mixing up the use of these things. But it was cool that he was clearly thinking along those lines. And I wish I'd been able to appreciate it at the time, but it's a cool book.
And now let's take a break for a totally organic conversation about a great company.
Our church has been searching for quality merch that won't blow the budget. I've been hearing great things about the Swan Brothers.
Oh, yeah? What do they offer?
Premium custom merchandise, screen printing, embroidery, and laser engraving on brands like the North Face, Nike, and Carhartt. I've heard they'll even set up a professional online store at no cost and handle everything end-to-end. Ordering, fulfillment, and even shipping.
Wow, sounds super useful. Who's a good fit?
Churches, schools, teams, companies, anybody with an event. Any group that needs reliable branded gear. High quality, quick turnaround, and volume pricing. Learn more at theswanbrothers.com/cross.
Okay, organic conversation over. Back to the show.
And then the other distinction, the non-cooperative versus cooperative. So so non-cooperative, I think, is probably what most people think. It's just, each agent is just trying to maximize his own payoff. And it doesn't have to be adversarial, right? Like there could be games such that, like there's things, there's things called coordination games. And so it's like, imagine it's a 2-player, 2-choice game, and they're just trying to meet somewhere for lunch, and it's like, they would rather meet at the Eiffel Tower or at the train station. And so if they both meet at the Eiffel Tower, they both get the highest payoff, but it's better if they both meet at the train station than if one guy goes to the Eiffel Tower and the other guy goes to the train station, stuff like that. And so you assign the numbers to make the story work out. And so the idea is, if they could both meet at Eiffel Tower, they would. But if you don't know where the other guy's going, stuff like that. So that's still a non-cooperative, but it's a positive sum game. But it's not adversarial. It's just saying, though, that, each person's, whereas a cooperative game, it's like people are part of different coalitions. And then, you can kind of just say, well, our group is going to go together. And then given that we're going to get this much of the pie, and it's like a result is stable if you can't rearrange, like if there's not people who could form a new coalition and then have voting power to do better than what they are under the current distribution. Is kind of the way to do it. So there's still ways that you can deviate and stuff, but it's like when you form a coalition, you just assume that goes through. It's not like then within the coalition, people can steal from each other. So,
I think we should save poking holes in game theory until the end, but I'll give you the choice. Do you want to start off just talking about what game theory is useful for, or would you rather dive into some of your examples first?
I mean, the useful for, I mean, it's interesting, and I think it's just very rigorous, right? And that's partly why I ended up. It was like I think I called it field, like it's like your major, but if it's in a PhD program, it's not really, you don't call it that. So yeah, when I was at NYU, I started taking stuff, and then the game theory to me was like, well, if we're going to sit here and have utility functions and mathematically model stuff, let's just go all the way. Mm-hmm. And so game theory was like the most rigorous, formal, like just the notation and stuff was really, like I said, like on the one hand, if you went into macro, it'd be like, oh, there's one household that lives forever, and then there's a central bank, and people should want to hold money, otherwise how are we gonna? Well, let's just put it in their utility function, like you hold money the way you'd hold a Picasso, and I mean, and then okay, and what's the optimal inflation? It was just so open and goofy, whereas in game theory, it was like just doing the notation to say, okay, this guy like on the Jth agent on the 16th round, and then how much do you know? And there's sub game perfect, and it was just extremely anal and everything. And so I thought, okay, yeah, if we're gonna do it, let's do it like this. So it's very rigorous and internally consistent. So there's that element of it, and I think it does, like the prisoner's dilemma. And I'll defer explaining it because the example I'm going to go over, folks, later is a prisoner's dilemma, and so there I'll spell it out more. But for people who know what that is, I mean, I think that does shed some light on like the problem of like how to think about morality, where it is a kind of thing where, yeah, if we all follow certain rules, we're all better off than if we live in a world where most people don't follow those rules, but yet there still could be an incentive for any individual to deviate and do even better. Mm-hmm. And so, in other words, it'd be silly to say, oh, it's, hey, you should do this. There's a moral rule, and someone says why, and it's like, if there's really no point whatsoever, like, oh, if we all just violate that rule, we'd all be better off. That seems like a dumb rule. But also too, if it's a thing where, like, we don't need to worry and say, hey, it's immoral to chop your finger off, so don't do it. You know what I mean? Because it's like, well, that's not really a big issue. Too many people are going to go chop their finger off. But to say you shouldn't look at pornography or something like there, maybe it does get into it because it's the kind of thing where, yeah, in the immediate, you might think it's benefiting you, but in the long run, it's not good and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, or certainly robbing a bank or something, like you can understand why do people rob banks. It's not a mystery, but you can see why, yeah, we can't tolerate that. Like you'd rather live in a world where nobody robs banks than in a world where lots of people do. So anyway.
I'm not sure how relevant this is, but it's got game theory in the name, so I feel like I have to say something about poker here. Mm-hmm. There is a thing called game theory optimal in all forms of poker. It's been studied the most, I think, in Hold'em, No Limit Hold'em. And the point is, you not perfectly, but you strategically randomize your range and your betting options, your bluffing frequencies, such that your opponents have no good answer for you. And I think the way they created the most recent version I've seen is having a bunch of neural nets play against one another a zillion times, to the point where no one has an edge on anybody else. And then you look at the decision trees that are in there that came out of that, and that's game theory optimal. Back when I was learning poker in the early 90s, I would have just called it like my baseline strategy. Most of the time I'm out there trying to outplay everybody. But when things aren't going well, maybe I'm fooling myself about how skilled I am. I'll tighten up and just revert to baseline, which is another word for game theory optimal, in my opinion. But if you find yourself out there at the tables trying to win money, playing game theory optimal would be just goofy. I mean, if you're at a table where that is appropriate, you should leave. What you should be trying to do instead of playing perfect is identifying the weaknesses and errors of your opponents and then playing exploitatively, which is much different than game theory as far as a range of strategies. Um, and again, I don't know if that little story is appropriate to this conversation we're having today about proper mathematical game theory, but like I said, it was in the title. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's great. I'm glad you brought that up. So again, for people, and we're going to see this, this is going to actually get somewhat technical in a few minutes here, folks. Yeah, that sounds very similar, Adam, to what your point there sounds like what I'm going to do with that slideshow I sent you. So it's, yeah, if I'm gathering, you're saying what they do is they take, like you could have a strategy where you're going around tables blowing people up.
yeah,
And you're just making a killing. But what they could say is, yeah, but that's because the players you happen to be hitting are using inferior strategies. What happens if more and more people start doing what you're doing? And then, imagine you, after a while, like the casino's only full of people who are doing whatever strategies you were employing there. And then there might be some other strategy where someone else just goes around and starts picking off you guys.
for sure.
And then the point is, can you just keep iterating that? And then is there this logical point at which the casino could just be full of these people doing this strategy and they just all bounce off each other?
Yeah, and just paying the rake over time. And I played this game pretty good, but the first time I saw the decision trees generated by this, the first one of these GTO generators, I was shocked and impressed at some of the things that it added to its ranges for deception value and some of the power that gave your range on later streets, which is way too complicated for me to get into. But the point being, I didn't think it was a joke at all. I thought it really had accomplished something. I would not want to play against somebody who was playing like that, or if I did, I wouldn't have an exploit. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know enough about poker to say whether, like in chess, in principle, it makes sense to talk about optimal play.
Yeah.
Right. Like in theory, because there's only a finite number of positions the chessboard could be in. So at some point, like I don't think we're there yet, but at some point, a computer could go and map out every possible chess game, go to the end, and then say like, oh, did we lose? We don't want to go down that path, and just work backwards, and then just know from the beginning. And they might be able to just say, if you're black, you're going to lose. If the other program engine is good enough, like there's no way to avoid, or maybe you can always force a draw or whatever. But then given that, then it could be flawless and you could define it there. And so there, it wouldn't make any sense. Whereas I could see in poker, maybe you would say, if you think you're playing against an opponent that is weak, you might want to do something that against a different player would actually be a mistake, but against this guy, you're going to make money. It's like there, it makes it, whereas in chess.
It stretches to chess too, though. Like if I know my opponent, if I push a pawn 3 times in a row, they're going to go nuts and bring their queen out, such that I can develop my board while chasing it around. Maybe instead of playing optimally, maybe I do that thing and push my pawn 3 times, and then because they do have something I can exploit.
Well, I mean, I guess if you get more points for winning quicker or winning with more material or something,
I see what you mean.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm saying, it's hard to say. Should I always try to play flawless chess or not? Like, you know what I'm saying? And so, I suppose if it's the kind of thing where you're saying, yeah, the engines have determined the black can't avoid a loss if white's playing properly, but maybe it's not, and so maybe black does something that. But even there, like if you know you're going to lose no matter what, you might as well try something and like do a.
No, you're right. I was giving myself a psychic profit for winning early in a hilarious fashion or something.
Yeah, but anyway, so you see that kind of. But we are going to see for sure in a real sense in that slideshow that I did, where there is a sense in which, the quote optimal game theoretic sub-game perfect equilibrium is just stupid. And I'll show people what I mean by that. But
are you ready to dive in?
I am. Before we go on the slideshow, let me just tell the verbal version first of a different one, warm people up. So again, the theme I'm going to do here is say, the tools of game theory are cool, but I think a lot of professional economists just naturally go along. And not only do they set up the game and like, oh, let's think about it this way, and there's a formal strategy space and blah, 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 in a lot of situations, but then they just jump right into, oh, and let's calculate compute what the equilibrium is. And then there's even more refined equilibrium constructs that I'll get to, and then just that's what we're going to focus on and think that's the outcome, and not realizing that, well, no, that's a separate thing. It's one thing to assume people are playing this game, it's another to assume the outcome is going to be an equilibrium one. Okay, and we'll see why that's significant. All right, so, and this really was a revelation for me when I was going to NYU, and I realized, because at first, when I got in there, having read Rothbard and stuff, and coming from I was at Hillsdale College and was steeped in Austrian economics, and I just thought these mainstream guys were stupid, like nutty. And I get to NYU, and these were the smartest guys I have ever met in my life to this point, and they were super rigorous and stuff. And then it's not worth getting into here, but to say oh, they believe in cardinal utility, yes and no. The sharper ones didn't. And so the first year I was kind of mad. I thought Rothbard misled me or something. I was like, wait a minute, these guys aren't this dumb. But then the more I was there, I was like, oh wait, no, they actually believe in these models. In other words, I just assumed they were using the models for the rigor and stuff, but then realized, okay, but in the real world, and it's like, oh, no, they don't. So the best story I have for this is there's this thing called the ultimatum game. And the way it's a real simple game. It's, let's say there's a pie of 10. Okay. And so there's a pie of 10 that the first player is going to propose a division. Say it's $10. And the first player proposes a division of it. To say, I get 6, you get 4. There's 2 players. And the second player's only strategy is to either say yes or no after hearing what so here's a sequential game. The first player makes the proposal. The second player either says yes or no once he sees what it is. And if he says yes, obviously they get the division. That's the end of the game. If he says no, they both get 0. Okay? Pretty simple game. And so there are lots of Nash equilibria, okay, that, for example, it could be a Nash equilibrium where the first person says, how about I get 1 and you get 9, and the second player's strategy, because remember, he's got to specify a strategy for player 2 says, for anything that I see, any offer, I need to know, yes, I need to say whether I'm saying yes or no. That's the strategy that he chooses. So one of his strategies could be, if I don't see an offer that's at least $9, I say no. And so given that that's what player 2 is doing, the best response of player 1 is to say, hey, I propose I get 1 and you get 9. Right? He wouldn't say, I propose I get 50 cents and you get $9.50, because player 2 would accept as little as 9. Right? See how that works? So a best response. So that's a Nash equilibrium. All right. But you can see why game theorists weren't just happy with Nash equilibrium. They said there's something weird there, because if player 1 said, how about I get 5 and you get 5, is player 2 really going to say no? Because then he gets 0 when he could have had 5, right? And so they pushed it. They refined the equilibrium concept to what's called subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, which said, by the way, let me just be clear. The reason that first thing is a Nash equilibrium is because, given that player 2's strategy is reject anything that's not at least 9 for me, is then player 1 is going to say, it's in an equilibrium, player 1 will offer 9 to the second guy. And so the second guy is not being hurt by insisting on that strategy, by playing that strategy, right? So I'm saying the way you model it, again, just the formal definition to say what is a Nash equilibrium, it's like you specify the strategy of player 1 and player 2, and then given the strategies of each of them, is the other's a best response. So, yep, that works. But you can see why, come on, that seems, the idea is it's based on a non-credible threat.
Yeah.
All right. And so to get rid of that, they, later, I don't know if Nash himself did this or just people did it in his wake, said, okay, it's not enough just that in the overall game there's a Nash equilibrium. Let's insist on each sub-game that there's a Nash equilibrium. And so there, you'd say, oh, in the sub-games, meaning like off the equilibrium path. And so that's why they're saying, no, this doesn't count, because player 2 if player one offered 5-5 or whatever, then in that sub game that's off the main equilibrium path, but in this hypothetical side tree, player two is rejecting 5 and getting 0, and that's not a Nash equilibrium if you just looked at that little game. So with this new equilibrium concept of insisting on sub game perfection, and if you insist or if you allow for infinitely divisible offers, right? So like not just down to the penny, but down to the half penny and so on. There's a unique sub-game perfect equilibrium in this game. Namely, player one says, I propose I get $10 and you get 0, and player two says, okay. Or strictly speaking, player two's strategy is accept any offer, including 0. Okay? And you say, what? How does that work? And so first I'll verify that it works, and then I'll show you that it's unique. So it works because given that player two is saying I'll accept any offer, including 0. Obviously, player one's best response is to say I get 10, you get 0. And then player two, given that player one's saying how about I get 10 and you get 0, he says, well, if I accept it, I get 0. If I reject it, I get 0. So I'm indifferent. Yeah, I'd be willing. That's the best response. Best response just means there don't exist a better thing, right? It's okay if it ties. And then you can go in the way you can prove it's unique is, again, any positive offer player two should accept, right? Because he's either getting that or 0. So it's not credible for him to reject any positive offer. And then given that, you could just keep whittling it down, right? Like player one wouldn't just say $9.99 and you get a penny, because he could say $9.99 and a half penny and you get half a penny, right? And he could just keep. So that's the trick mathematically if it's infinitely divisible. So that's how. Okay. So forgive me, folks, for setting all that up, but you understand the elegance and the mathematical formalism and how, look at the unique sub-game perfect equilibrium in this game is player one says I get 10 and you get 0, and player two says okay. So apparently there was a conference of game theorists, and they did a poll of the audience. These are professional game theory. And they said, hey, you're playing the ultimatum game. You're player one. It's a $10 pot. What division would you propose to player two? Like if you're playing it for real with another human, write it down and we'll collect all the papers. And they're going through 10, 10, 10. Everyone's saying 10. And one guy says 5 and 5. Like I get $5 and the other guy gets $5. And he said, and they were stunned. And they looked to see who it was. And it was this guy, Aumann, Aumann, who would end up winning the Nobel Prize and this kind of stuff. And the guy telling me the story and he was like, master, why did you write this? Right? Like the guy telling us to use the word master, like just to show the reverence. And then Aumann said, the guy's telling the story to us in class. And the guy says, because you never know how crazy the other person's going to be. And he said, and everyone went, oh. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm crazy. Like, you're telling this story and you idiots were actually going to say to somebody, how about I get 10 and you get 0?
Yeah.
And the guy, so, I don't even think I need to explain why that's so nutty to people.
It's nutty.
The point of my story is to say that he's telling the story. And the guy was the reason this game theorist, at NYU, this class was in game theory, right? Like this guy's telling us to motivate some of his own work on like unusual preferences and things like if you care, I don't remember if he didn't have envy in his utility function. What he did is that what if the player's payoff is partly dependent on what the other player's payoffs are, right? Because normally when you model this, all you care about is your own immediate payoff, right? And so anyway, and I was just flabbergasted. And again, that's when I started to realize, Rothbard was right. These guys are insane.
Yeah. All those people that said 10
yeah,
have fallen so far down their model, they don't know what a person is anymore.
Right. So do you see how, what I was saying, Adam, that they're, strictly speaking, the problem, it wasn't just their focus on equilibrium, on sub-game perfect equilibrium with an infinitely divisible strategy space. Like I have to say that many syllables to explain, you know what I mean? Because even if you just allowed it for it to be a penny, then it would be $9.99 and a penny. You get what I'm saying? Like that would work.
Yeah.
Because, but anyway, because then clearly the guy's going to take the penny and not. Whereas if it's zero, if you're offering him zero, it's kind of weird to say, oh, well, why wouldn't he just reject that? You say, well, because you get zero. But if you're offering him zero, he says, yeah, but then it wouldn't be an equilibrium. He's like, who cares? He's like, it's not like player two is like, well, I don't want to not be in a Nash equilibrium, so I'm, you know what I mean? That's how nuts this is. So anyway, okay, so there's that. All right. Do you want to say anything on that before we jump into the slideshow? What's funny is I'm looking at the clock and you were worried we're going to be light on time.
I know. I just want to ask one quick question. Please
Yeah.
do not let me derail you with it. I asked an LLM to come up with a bunch of objections to game theory.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them you just mentioned, some people say that there are multiple, sometimes hundreds of Nash equilibria, and that game theory gives you no principled way to predict which one will be played. I don't know about that second part, but do you think, what do you think about multiple equilibria? Do you think it's a strength or a weakness, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, so what Grok said or whatever LM used, that's true, and that is one way of explaining it. And yes, so often what happens is they're looking at a one-shot game that people are going to play repeatedly, and that's one of the motivations for why the equilibrium construct holds. And that's why it does make sense in a biological context, that these animals just keep interacting with it like hawk and dove or something, and just, oh yeah, there's going to be 1,000 interactions, and over time, what's going to survive, right? And that's fine. But if you actually are playing 1,000 iterated, game, well, then that's the game, and people should be theorizing about that, not let's just assume we're going to keep playing the same game over and over and over again. So there's that element, and yes, game theorists do not have a good, or at least when I went through anyway. So I was going through in the early 2000s. So I imagine there's been a ton of work since then. But yes, the theory per se and the way the what I thought were goofy mistakes people were making was precisely that they were just jumping to, oh, of course there's going to be an equilibrium here, without realizing. I mean, it's kind of funny because it's kind of analogous to like the Austrian critique of like antitrust theory and stuff that like the mainstream economists just jump to and say, oh, what's market concentration? We don't want a firm with market power. And so, and Hayek, famously had a thing about, and his, competition is a discovery procedure, saying it's like they just looking at the end state of the competitive market, not realizing like the process that got them there. Yeah. And that does carry over to game theory too, or at least as of the early 2000s when I was hip deep in this literature. So yeah, there is that. And we're going to see all that in this slideshow. Do you want to?
Let's dive in if you're ready. Yep.
Okay. So here, folks, is the famous prisoner's dilemma. This is just the one-shot version. And partly the reason we're doing this, folks, is because I botched it so badly in the previous episode when I was trying to go through that I said to Adam, no, I gotta restore my street cred here. So let's go ahead and go through this. So the idea, and in the in the original story, it would be confess and remain silent would be the two choices. But what they're trying to get at, and the way the prisoner's dilemma has been generalized and applied to all sorts of social settings, besides just literally the cops have two, prisoners in different cells and they're giving them deals, is this idea that if they both do the thing that we're going to call cooperate, then they each get a payoff of 3. If they both defect, they get a payoff of 1. So it would be better for both players if they both cooperate. That would be a Pareto improvement over them both defecting, if you're familiar with that terminology, right? But alas, in this game, the only Nash equilibrium is they both defect. And in fact, you can say a stronger thing, that for each player, it is what's called is it strongly dominant or strictly dominant? I forget what the adjective is, or adverb, strategy to defect. And so the way you analyze this is look at it from player one's point of view, that suppose he thinks player 2 is cooperating. All right, so we're in that first column. And then player 1 says, if I cooperate, I get 3. If I defect, I get 5. Okay, so the idea is if he thinks player 2 is going to cooperate, player 1 gets a better payoff if he defects. But what if he thinks player 2 is going to defect? So now you're looking in that second column. If player 1 cooperates, he gets a 0. If he defects, he gets a 1. So again, player 1 gets a higher payoff if he defects, if player 2 happens to defect. So the point is, no matter what he thinks player 2 is doing, player 1 gets a strictly higher payoff by defecting than cooperating. It's a strictly dominant strategy. It's a strictly dominant strategy. So clearly you would think if all he's guided by is his own payoff, that's all he cares about, and he's being rational about it. In general, in a game like this, you might say, well, what do I think the other guy's going to do? But in a game like this, where it doesn't matter what the other guy does, in every possible scenario, I personally do better if I defect and cooperate. It seems pretty unassailable that I should defect. But the thing that's crazy about this, or weird, is player 2 has the symmetric analysis, and so he likewise concludes, doesn't matter what player 1's doing, regardless, it's better if I play defect. And so they end up in that bottom right one where they both get 1 when they could have gotten 3 apiece. Okay? So that's why it's a Nash equilibrium, and this underscores that, like David Friedman in one of his books calls this the limits of rationality or something. Okay. So there you go. Now, a game theorist said, is there more we can say here, though? Because isn't part of the reason that this doesn't feel right to us, like what if these guys were going to play this game over and over again? Like, couldn't we come up with cooperation that would, like, be a stable equilibrium outcome? So actually, Adam, can you skip to the third one? I was thinking about it. I think it'll be better if the infinitely. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so here, I'm going to enlarge my screen. So here, let's assume they're going to play this. You can either assume they're going to play it an infinite number of times, or you can assume every time they play it, then they like flip a coin or something to see, are we going to, or randomly do something to see, are we going to play another round? In which case, in principle, you don't know how many rounds they're going to play. It just keeps going out. So one little quirk is, in order to even model this, you got to use a discount rate, because if they're going to play in principle an infinite number of rounds, like no matter what they do, they're going to get infinite payoff. If like you just added up, the payoffs from each one-shot game. So what you do is typically in this thing is you put a discount rate. So it's this, it's typically a delta between 0 and 1. So like, the first round is just the pure payoffs. The second round it's delta times that. And then the next round is delta squared times that payoff. Right?
And just to make sure people are following, the intuition is the time value of money. Money now is worth more than money later. And how do you decide how much? You pick an interest rate and then discount it by however many years. Yeah,
exactly. Okay. So given now that we're doing that, the question is, can you get cooperation here? Okay. And so now I got to be clear. What is the strategy in this thing? It's strictly speaking, in the one-shot game, the strategy is simple. It's just, do you cooperate or defect? Or you could randomize and say, like, flip a coin and, do a 1/5 probability on cooperate and 4/5 on defect or something. But we saw in that first iterate, just one shot. No, the unique Nash equilibrium is just 100% you defect and the other guy does the same thing. Okay. So here the strategy space is actually kind of complicated. And what you say is, for each round, given the history of what you've seen the other guy do up to that point, what's your next move going to be? So like this is long mapping. Okay. But one thing that is an interesting proposal, and when they do like computer simulated matches of these things, and like people put in their bots that do different strategies. And so one idea is what's called tit for tat. And so strictly speaking, what it just reduces to, again, the actual strategy space is a real complicated mathematical object, but intuitively it's just saying you start out in the round one, you cooperate, and then each subsequent round, you just copy whatever the other guy did the prior round. Okay. And so that's called tit for tat. So in other words, if a two tit for tat bots meet each other, then they're just going to keep cooperating forever. Just get this flow of threes. All right. But if a tit for tat meets, like a selfish bot, that defects in round one, that selfish about, oh, it's going to get the 5 in that first round and catch the other guy with his pants down, and the other guy's going to get a 0 on that first round. But now the tit for tat is just going to keep defecting forever too. Okay. And so it reverts to the 1-1 stream of ones. Okay. So how do you analyze this? And would it be a Nash equilibrium for this tit for tat to work? And so you say, all right, well, what you need to check is to see, given that the other player is doing a tit for tat strategy, is it a best response for you to do a tit for tat strategy? Okay. And so, you could just evaluate them blindly, or not blindly, but like mechanically, and just do the full, 3 plus blah, 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 forever versus the other possible outcomes. But the way to just check it is on the margin and just say, what are your marginal gains and losses if you were to deviate from that? And so the idea is, if the other guy is playing tit for tat and then you're considering, should I deviate? There's a short-term gain and a long-term loss. That's the intuition, right? So if you defect, then instead of you getting your 3, you get the 5, right? That's the short-term benefit. So you get 2 more than you otherwise would have. But then the problem is, instead of you continuing to earn that stream of 3s forever, now you just get a stream of 1s forever. Because now the other guy, once you burn him, he's going to switch to defensive mode. He's just going to defect every round thereafter. And so you're just going to be locked in now forever to get a stream of 1s. And so, if you're looking at the video here, so what you're checking is to see the defection isn't worth it, or is worth it if 2 is bigger than, and then the loss of 2 forever, right? Because you're getting 1 instead of getting the 3 that you would have had if you just kept cooperating. And so that's, 2 times delta plus 2 delta squared, which is just, 2 delta divided by 1 minus delta. Okay. So you rearrange the inequalities and it works out. Cooperation makes sense. In other words, the marginal cost of defecting is higher than the marginal benefit if the discount rate is greater than or equal to 1/2 with these particular numbers that we've chosen. Okay. And so what that means is, so long as people are sufficiently patient, as long as they don't discount the future too heavily, you can support constant cooperation in this prisoner's dilemma if it's infinitely repeated. Mm-hmm. Right? Which kind of makes sense. And so again, it kind of does, okay, that there is something weird about that, the logic and the breakdown, the rationality that, because you want to say, oh, but can't we kind of step outside the game and just know that if we both think of the long, and so this is formally modeling. So this is kind of like what's cool about this stuff, right? That you have the idea of that one-shot one that it seems like we're leaving something out here, especially like in society where you're living with people and there's a community. It's, and you don't want to just be wishy-washy and just say, oh, come on, do the right thing. But, you're trying to be real formal about it. And this is kind of groping around with it. Like, yeah, if you're going to deal with somebody an indefinite number of times and, you're thinking long-term, it makes sense to not mess with the guy and to just keep benefiting from the cooperation, even though you each are at each other's mercy. At any given time, you could screw the guy for short-term gain, but then you lose, and that kind of makes sense, right?
It's fascinating. And going back to the one-shot prisoner's dilemma of slide 1, it gives me a newfound appreciation for the mafia, because, I assume they think all of their soldiers know game theory, but to keep them from defecting, they just say, hey, we're going to slaughter your family unless you cooperate. And so just that one addition gets everybody to cooperate and everyone's better off. So yay, criminal organizations, right?
Exactly. Okay. So now, this is fine as far as, again, you can see it's kind of neat and whatever. And what typically happens with this stuff is, somebody will go write a paper and they'll do something, and then people sit there and look at it, and it doesn't quite capture, your intuition. It's like, yeah, it's leaving something out. But in formal economics and game theory, it's not enough just to say, yeah, but come on, the real world's so much more complicated. So they'll say, okay, so model it, right? Mm-hmm. So you can see the difference going from the one shot where people were unsatisfied with, come on, that's leaving out something. And so that, okay, we'll do that. All right, so now the last thing we'll go over here, folks, is the finitely repeated one. This one is where I say, like, again, the economists, when they get into this, just their fixation on the equilibrium stuff, okay, is nutty. Okay, so, but in any event, what's interesting is with the one I just showed you, it was very important. In order for that to go through, it was critical that either they literally think we're going to play an infinite number of rounds, or at the very least, like I say, when each round ends, they flip a coin or something to say, are we going to play again? That they can't know on the front end how many total rounds there are going to be. And by the way, in terms of the discount rate, so you're right, Adam. One interpretation of that would be you're discounting the future because it's in the future. It's not as important to you. Or another interpretation would be every round there's a delta chance you're going to play again or not. And so that could be the motivation for what the heck is that delta factor doing there. Like you say, oh, because the game might just end, in which case, okay. So anyway, so the point is, what if instead of that element, instead it's just, no, we're going to play capital N rounds. And N could be 60 quadrillion. Okay, it could be a humongous number, but the point is it's finite and both players know it at the start, right? So we know we're going to play this game a lot of times in a row, but we know exactly how many times we're going to play it. And so now the question is, can you get long run cooperation in this setting? And you might think, well, sure, because again, the whole deal here is if you can just cooperate, you get strings of threes. Whereas if you're defecting, you're getting strings of ones, and it's not like, it's not a zero-sum game, right? Like you're both getting threes instead of one. Like, so how could this possibly be? And yet watch what happens. Again, if you're going to model it in this, strict rationalistic game theoretic sense, is to say, you might, you could have strategies like a tit for tat or whatever that sort of punish the guys. Yeah, we start out cooperating, and by the way, they've done other iterations, things like 2 tits for a tat and things like that, where the person might like cooperate twice or whatever. You know what I mean? Or if the other guy, like it's not just if he deviates once, then you're forever. Like if he then cooperates back, you forgive him and you move. But so all kinds of stuff. Yeah. So in any event, So yeah, you could imagine you could do all this stuff in the opening and mid game, as it were, to use like a chess analogy. But the point is, clearly, no matter what, when you get to the last round, right? We're now at round capital N. There's not going to be another round. At that point, that one game is the one-shot prisoner's dilemma. And so we know for sure rationality dictates, if I'm player one, when I get to that last round, I clearly want to defect because I know no matter what player 2 does in that last round, I earn more if I defect. So that's what I'm going to do. And I don't need to worry about, well, what are going to be the long-term consequences of that, because the game's over at that point, right? So we clearly know in round N, capital N, both players in any equilibrium are going to defect. Oops, but now we know in round N-1, the second last round, clearly, if I'm player 1, I want to defect. And you might say, well, no, but what if, that pisses off player 2, is I already know with certainty he's going to defect in the last round. So there's no downside to me defecting in round N-1. So now we've concluded, and player 2 does the same reasoning. So now we've concluded for sure, if both players are rational, it's got to be in the round N and round N-1. They clearly both defect. And you just keep doing that through round 2, all the way up to round 1. And and it's not just in any Nash equilibrium. It's what's called in any rationalizable outcome, where it's a stronger concept, meaning like you can't even attribute beliefs to the other person that survive, scrutiny. Okay. So that's the thing where, it's just boom. And so what's weird, let me just say that one weird thing, and then I'm curious your reaction with this one. And this was the thing, by the way, I was going to do my dissertation on this stuff because this really bothered me.
Me too.
I'll tell you why. And then I think it's just funny. I don't think I've ever said this like publicly, Adam. I don't even know if I said this to Joe. But Joe, what made me end up doing a thing on Bombaverkian capital theory for my dissertation is I was going to the Austrian colloquium at NYU, which was every Monday, and Joe Salerno, one of them, presented a paper on capital theory in the Austrian tradition, and it was just so like I have to do this. You know what I mean? Like it reminded me, like, no, this is where my destiny lies, and I left this stuff. But what I was going and talking to, like, there was this guy Benoit at NYU had published papers on this stuff. Like he was in the cutting edge, and I was talking to him about this. I said, this doesn't make sense because here's what's involved. Like, let's say let's say it's a 10,000 round game. Okay, so there's lots of payoffs you're leaving on the table.
Lots of threes you're leaving on the table instead of ones. Yeah.
And I said,
how are we not taking that into consideration?
And I said, so listen, let's say you're sitting down with a guy and he cooperates and you defect, and he cooperates and you defect, and you go through 100 rounds and he's cooperated every single round. And I say, and you're telling me the reason I'm going to keep defecting is because I know for sure the other guy is going to do nothing but defect, even though I've just seen him cooperate 100 rounds in a row. And I said, that doesn't make any sense. You get what I'm saying, Adam?
Yeah, of course.
Like that's not. And now you could say, well, hey, yeah, you just got a stream of fives. And said he keeps cooperating. Well, let's keep going. But you get the point, is that I'm saying, like, the logic of, well, no, I am absolutely sure all I'm going to do is see defect from this guy because we can both do backward induction. Once he plays a cooperate, shouldn't that mess with your theorizing? And then given that, and if that possibly led you to consider cooperating because you realize something's wrong, wouldn't it be in the other guy's interest to experiment, to cooperate on round one, just to possibly shunt you off of this, backwards, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's nothing irrational about that. Like, to say what would be irrational is after you see 100 cooperates in a row to think, no, I am absolutely sure, I assign 100% probability that I'm going to see nothing but defect from this guy because that's what backward induction dictates. That, no, that is irrational. So what are you talking about? And, and he didn't, I talked to the advisor and he understood what I was saying, and I don't think he gave me a great, and that I hadn't seen anybody like formally model that or try to study that. So anyway, that's where I was going to go with this. And then I got,
did your advisors give you did they say that you probably won't be able to model this, or do you think you could have?
I mean, you could certainly model it. It's just you'd have to come up with some. I mean, again, the trick with these things and like how do you get stuff published and how what makes something catch on? You can't just poke holes in the existing thing.
Yeah,
because everyone can say, "Yeah, we know." You got to give them something else, right? And so, I would have had to come up with some alternate way of like, what's a rational way given what you've seen the guy do. So I don't know, but I did, it's funny. I was talking to the guy, and at first he was just kind of telling me because I said to him, I was like, it seems to me like it's the fixation on equilibrium that's a problem here. And he goes, well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, we assume that you play the game enough and then equal. I said, yeah, but that's the whole point. Like if we're doing a repeated game, it's not just you keep playing the game and eventually it settles down. Like it's the one shot. We're playing the game once. It just involves 1,000 rounds. Like that's one game. You know what I mean? There's no reason why should that be in equilibrium? There's no principle saying that, especially because normally the motivation for equilibrium, like going back to your poker thing, it's like, oh yeah, all the card sharps are bouncing around the rooms and the tables, and it should settle down where nobody can gain at the expense of anybody else. Like they're all playing defensively. And so that's why you would expect if we checked in with your casino, 1,000 rounds from now, everyone's playing the game theory optimal strategy.
Except no, the casino would have closed years ago.
Well, yeah, well, there's that, but you get what I'm saying. Given what the institutional rules are,
yeah,
that's their logic that they're assuming like is random interactions, and so yeah, I suppose if what we're doing is, and that's what they did sometimes in these games too, these simulations. If it's like you're playing a one-shot prisoner's dilemma, and you're in like a Thunderdome or something with a bunch of other bots and you're just doing one, you know what I mean? Like you're playing this guy once and then you go play some, you're like there's 1,000 and you randomly pair people every round and you're going to do that 1,000 times. Okay, then to just say I'm just defecting the whole time, that makes more sense. But no, if you're playing the same guy 1,000 rounds in a row, I'm saying under what principle of rationality or self-interest does it make sense to say, oh, the unique equilibrium is we just both defect the whole way through? That doesn't make any sense. That's not right. I'm not saying it offends me as a Christian. I'm saying that offends me as a rationalist.
Yeah,
I'm offended as a comedian.
I'm where to start? Well, first let me take this off the screen. I'm fascinated by these game theory arguments and models. I was surprised to learn that 15 people earned the Nobel Prize in economics over the years who were game theoreticians.
Well, that's why it made sense for them to go into that. Their self-interest.
But it's interesting.
Yeah, Bob, we don't believe this stuff. We're just doing it for the money.
I just want this prize. Yeah, it's $1 million. Is that what it is? $1 million? Anyway. But as interesting as these things are, they frustrate me equally because the map is not the territory. All these assumptions are goofy. And it just seems perfectly obvious in that example you just gave that the two people would just, there's a metagame. We lock eyes across the board or whatever and say, we're all going to cooperate here, right? And say, yeah, of course. And then you earn a string of 3s for n times because you'd have to just be a lunatic to do anything else. So do you want to go through, like I said, Grok gave me a whole bunch of criticisms of game theory, but you must have a whole bunch in your head too. Like the things that make it, yes, interesting, but not realistic, reasons to just discount the validity of the whole thing. Do you have anything you want to say right off the bat? Or?
Well, before we get, I just want to underscore like what you said, and I empirically, like they have tournaments, or they did. I don't know if they still do this stuff, but they would have tournaments where people would submit their, bots or whatever, and or maybe sometimes they even had it with human, like actually, doing it live. I can't remember all the details, and I would say things like, some people would quote find each other. The reason I'm saying is because you said the lock eyes. Yeah. And it was like, some people, like some, would just defect the whole time, but others were open to cooperation, and some were like doormats and would just sit there and cooperate like a bunch, just like, what are you doing, dude? Come on. and others, it would just, they'd give a brief window. But the thing is, like, the winners of the tournaments were never the pure defectors because they're getting a string of 1s. Or they make it some 5s, but they're mostly getting 1s. And the ones who would win would have long. And what I'm saying is weird is, are the defector ones laughing and mocking like, aha, you idiots, don't you know how to think? When the other people got a higher payoff than they did. So it's like, no, in what sense, and it's, and you can't, and you're tempted to say, like, to go back to the chess or the poker, like you can understand someone saying, oh, I was playing optimal, game theory, optimal strategy. And you won more money than I did, but you just got lucky because there were some idiots at the tables.
I hear that all the time.
Right? So you could say that. But what doesn't work in a thing like this is where even the idiots also got a higher payoff than you did.
Here's the thing you'll hear as a poker professional from people who aren't so good. This game's terrible. How can you win any money? These people just call anything. And you just want to look at them. Yeah, that's good. You really got to be able to figure out a strategy where you can make that work for you, that they call anything.
Right. So I get that, how that is amusing to you or whatever, and that you should be able to work with it. But I'm saying at least it could make sense in that setting for someone to complain and say, I was playing perfectly.
Yeah.
I was defensive because for all I knew, I was going against,
I was GTO. I bluffed the exact right amount of times and they just called me.
Right. But I'm saying it doesn't really make sense for some guy to be an elitist after he plays in this tournament of, the final, we play the Prisoner's Dilemma. We each pair you up with somebody and you play 1,000 rounds of the Prisoner's Dilemma, and you do that, with 20 different partners. And at the end, we just see who's got the most points. And it doesn't make sense for the guy who comes in the bottom, 90th percentile to complain that, oh yeah, everybody else has played stupid. even when they were paired with each other, and they both got more money than payoff than you did because they both were stupid. They were like symmetrically stupid, and that's why they both beat you. In terms of, clearly the metric is who gets the most points. That's it.
Sure.
End of story.
Did you fiddle around at all with that link I gave you to an online
I
game
didn't have
theory
time.
toy?
No.
It was kind of cool. In most traditional ways you set it up, it was multiplayer and iterative. And most of the time, if you set up the payoffs in a sort of normal way, over the repeated, there's like 5 or 6 different strategies. And most of the time, here's the way it's set up. After the first iteration of 20 participants or something like that, maybe more, maybe 30, they'll take the 5 with the lowest score and kick them off, and then play it again. Take the 5 with the lowest score and kick them off. Setting up the payoffs in a normal way, the tit for tat strategy would end up winning out, and everyone would be playing that strategy who was left. I thought that was kind of cool. But if you change the the variables, you could ruin that, and an exploitive strategy or a mean-spirited strategy would win out. I just thought it was fun to fiddle around with.
Mm-hmm.
But
again, in fairness to, I'm sitting here thinking, one could say, okay, and what happens if they keep doing that? They keep having that tournament every year. So in the beginning, the winner's the ones who do the tit for tat. But then in the next year, the winner's going to be the person who does tit for tat, but then defects in the last round. Right? Because the other, he's going to get the 5 and everyone's going to get.
Yeah.
And then, the next year, it's going to be the winner is guy tit for tat and then defects in the second last round. Right. And so after a while, but it's going to cycle, because then at some point when, everybody's mostly doing that, there's going to be a couple guys that are doing tit for tat and they're going to crush those guys. So it's, anyway.
No, I get what you mean. But the biggest, here's one criticism. Payoffs are not objectively known or stable. Game theory requires cardinal, interpersonally comparable utility functions. In reality, preferences are constructed on the fly, context-dependent, and often non-transitive. People care about fairness, identity, status, and narrative in ways that are hard or impossible to reduce to a fixed payoff matrix. Like everybody I know, if they're presented, the other guy gets 9 and you get 1 offer, they're just not going to give a damn that 1 is better than nothing. And they're going to say, go to hell. You come to me with a fair deal, or you can literally starve. And, it'd be cool if we could model things like that.
Right. And the thing too is, even with that, it's not that it's irrational.
Right.
Right. Like, in other words, knowing that people are like that,
right,
they're going to get more.
That's why the Nobel Prize guy came with 5.5 in that poll, and he's not dumb; he's smart.
Right. Of the ones you just said, so most of that is boilerplate stuff, and that's fine. The one that I would say doesn't irk me so much is the interpersonal utility comparison, because the way you write that out, and especially if you're trying to generalize it and say, "Oh, this isn't just about money; this is whatever." It does lead you to believe, but strictly speaking, again, because if it's a non-cooperative game, those numbers don't need to be interpersonally, all it has to be is that for each person, those things correctly are modeling, and the reason the numbers do matter, like it's not just first, second, third best, like can't just be ordinal, is because if you are going to have probability, then in some settings, like you need to know if there's a 10% chance that this happens and a 90% chance that this happens, how do you do that? And so typically you assume that what those numbers mean. Oh, this goes back to are the von Neumann-Morgenstern utility functions.
Yeah.
Which is when you do probability weights, and that you just add them up. So that was another cool thing that in von Neumann-Morgenstern's framework that, again, I assume von Neumann did most of it.
All the rest of these things that Grok came up with are variations of, people don't act like that. They're not necessarily rational and outcome maximizing. Culture, plays a huge part. So, it's all various ways of expressing the same things, like nice mathematical model, very rigorous, but unfortunately it doesn't pertain to humans so much. I wish I'd looked up exactly what elements of computer science this game theory was instrumental in. That probably would have been as interesting as the evolution one, because genes are blind and they are pretty outcome maximizing, as it turns out. Have you said all you want to say on the subject?
Well, I mean, certainly the rigorous analysis, like a blackjack, like there, you can define like an optimal strategy and whatever, and it totally works. And then it's just a matter of rules of thumb because it's too hard to keep track of what the literal optimal thing is.
Right.
But the big deal is there that you're not. It's not really it's a strategy, but you know what I mean. Like you're not. The dealer doesn't have any discretion. Like it really is just a mechanical thing. Like you don't actually have to get inside anybody else's head in order to play blackjack. So there, I think, yes, the rigorous computer simulated analysis just showing you this is the right thing to do.
Sure, yeah.
It totally makes sense. Whereas in poker, I mean, I guess it certainly helps to have some rigorous analysis and for you to be able to do Monte Carlo simulations and things like to have that as one of the inputs into your decision making is certainly important. Like you need to look at the table and know what's the odds that he got his flush. But there's a lot more than just that.
Yeah, studying the structure of the game. I called it back in the day my baseline strategy, but that's, any book you'd pick up on the game would tell you this is how you play. And then looking at those robots fighting each other and creating a GTO for No Limit Hold'em, for example, that was fascinating, and it's useful as all heck. But again, if you ever found yourself playing that way for more than 20 minutes, go see a movie.
Tell me more why, though.
Because you're up against people that are all playing the exact GTO strategy. It's only best when everyone else is playing perfect.
That's what I'm... Okay.
Yeah. So go have dinner.
But hang on. I want to isolate what you're saying, though. Are you saying because you're just beating your head against the wall, so don't mess with that? Or you're saying actually...
You're just paying the rake. Over time, barring, the ups and downs of variation, you're just paying the rake. There's no money to be won.
Okay, but that doesn't mean it's wrong.
That's no, it's right. I'm just saying you're better off not playing.
Okay, but I was wondering, is there possibilities where if they like sort of like are they like a local optimum? In other words, given that everyone else is playing that is an equilibrium, but actually kind of like what I was saying a minute ago with if you kept iterating the tournaments and then people were doing tit for tat except for the last round, and the next year tit for tat and then they're kind of jumping ahead and whoever defects first wins. But after a while, if people are back to they're defecting after the fifth round, the people who come and say, no, I'm just doing tit for tat the whole time, if there's enough of them in the pool, they outperform. So I'm saying with the GTO things or whatever, is it a point where, yes, given that everyone else is doing GTO, any slight deviation is not optimal? Like, could you come in and just do something, quote, crazy?
No. Your intuition is probably that, like most losers in poker call way too much. They play way too many hands. Mm-hmm. And then the opposite error, and it is an error, is hardly playing any hands and being super, super tight. And you play tight against the fish, but you play pretty aggressive against the nits because they fold too much. But GTO is actually a pretty aggressive, wild equilibrium, if that's the right word. There literally is nothing that you can do that's better than that. So your best play is to play GTO 2 if you can't escape, if you can't go to dinner and see a movie.
Right, okay.
It's defensive at that point. There is no error that they're making that is exploitable.
Okay, interesting. In case people lost it, GTO is game theory optimal.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so it is kind of like chess where if the engine's, quote, playing perfect chess, there's nothing you can do.
You can't.
I was even wondering
you can't come off the top rope and do anything against that.
I was wondering, like, it's I don't even, maybe they already have this where it's just like various chess engines, just like if they have tournaments and they just, because obviously humans get their asses kicked at this point by computers, but I didn't know like if the different, do you know like do the different software companies or chess engine companies have tournaments?
I don't know if they do that, but I do know in various poker games, in various places, including at the World Series of Poker. You'll have people trying to slip in their piece of software to tell them what to do in specific situations. There's a bit of a kerfuffle because when they got heads up at the final table, one guy was playing really weird and slow and moving over and talking to his buddy at the rando had a laptop, and what he was doing was figuring out the shove fold charts for no limit hold'em given the stack sizes, just readjusting each hand. And you don't want that. I think if poker is going to continue in the future, there's going to be like no electronics devices of any kind allowed, because it just makes it terrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they did that with in chess.
There's bots too online. There are people that are just putting up their bots.
Yeah.
And it's a big problem.
Right. And in chess, I know that there was some guy that was alleged to have cheated in the, and they were like doing forensic analysis of his games and whatever, like to say, this was a really good move he made here. This is way better than, that kind of stuff. But no, what I meant was not are humans perhaps relying on coaching somehow, I mean, it's literally like, oh, this company's got the cutting edge chess engine and this company has their version, and they go at it in tournaments every year.
It has to have happened, what you're talking about, but I've never heard of it.
I was wondering, like, could it be that, if those things just got really good? But again, my understanding is like the number of possible states of the chessboard is so huge that they're not, like, it's still like once the game is almost near the end, they can just like use backward induction, just literally map out every possible thing and be fine. But like the mid game, it's so wide open. It's still a lot of rules of thumb and things like that. And they have like certain openings memorized. And I was just wondering, would there always still be like a way to exploit that? And I was thinking, like, if you had, a company that you didn't have a huge budget, so if we go against these big boys that have these huge computers, and if we play a standard game, we're dead because they've analyzed it, twice as much as we have. But what you got to do is find some weird, game that they've never seen that opening before. Like, what the hell is this?
It's so interesting. It's almost metaphysical, right?
Yeah.
Like if in the mid game there are as many variations as there are stars in the universe or whatever.
Oh, it's
there
way
really
more.
is that. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe the space is so immense that it's unmasterable or something. I don't know. I don't have an opinion, but it's interesting.
But anyway, so where I was going with that was I could see it being possible, at least, that even though given that these engines have all been like fine-tuned, they're all like pretty impregnable against each other, that there could still be an opening where some newcomer could come in with this weird approach because it's hitting stuff,
I am a guy who loves games and gambling, and I read Flatland as a little kid. So I'm always assuming that I could come in from another dimension that that the system is not expecting, again, coming off the top rope. But I don't know.
And that's basically what we're having to hope, like with the AI, and they're taking over. But the human's always going to be the last second, like, wait a minute,
Got to raise up John Connor. All right, well, we've gone way over time. Do you have any other pearls before we go?
Just remember, folks, yes, be rational, but also be kind. And don't assume that you have to be inside of an equilibrium. That is not required.
Yes, very wise. Please go to our various YouTube pages and like and subscribe because it helps. Mine is youtube.com/@HamanNature, HAMAN. What's yours, Bob? Bob Murphy Show?
BobMurphyShow.com. And follow me on Twitter @BobMurphyEcon.
You should definitely do that. Bob is a rampaging, unstoppable force on the X platform. And please visit my Substack because I write articles too. That's HamanNature.com will get you there. This was great, Bob. Thank you for your wisdom. And we'll see y'all next time.
Thanks, everybody.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.